Imagine waking up every day with a mind full of big dreams, powerful ideas, and an intense desire to become more, yet feeling strangely unable to move. Not tired. Not unmotivated. Just stuck. You know your potential, you can almost touch the future you want, but instead of taking action, you scroll, delay, and wait for the right moment. This is not the story of someone who lacks ambition. This is the psychology of someone whose ambition is fighting against their own brain. In clinical psychology, this pattern raises curiosity rather than judgment. Because when a person is truly lazy, they don't suffer from their inaction. They don't feel guilt at night, they don't replay missed opportunities in their mind, and they don't imagine alternate versions of themselves who could have been more. But ambitious individuals who appear lazy experience a quiet mental conflict every single day. Their thoughts run faster than their behavior. Their inner standards are high, sometimes impossibly high, and their nervous system knows it. What the audience rarely sees is the invisible tension. Ambition creates a constant future-oriented pressure, while the brain, designed for survival, keeps asking a different question: how much energy will this cost me? When the imagined effort feels overwhelming, the mind doesn't respond with excitement, it responds with avoidance. This avoidance disguises itself as laziness, but psychologically, it is a protective response, not a character flaw. And here is the paradox that pulls people in: the more ambitious the person, the heavier the mental load. The clearer the vision, the stronger the fear of failing it. So instead of moving forward imperfectly, the mind chooses stillness. It delays. It waits. It convinces itself that tomorrow will feel easier. This is not the absence of drive, it is ambition trapped inside a brain that has learned to associate action with emotional risk. What we are really observing is not laziness, but a silent negotiation between desire and self-protection. And understanding this negotiation changes everything. In clinical psychology, the coexistence of laziness and ambition is not viewed as a contradiction but as a predictable outcome of how the brain is wired for survival. The human brain did not evolve to chase dreams, build legacies, or maximize potential. It evolved to conserve energy, avoid unnecessary risk, and keep the body alive. Ambition, however, demands the opposite. It asks the mind to invest energy now for a reward that exists only in the future. This fundamental mismatch is where the struggle begins. Ambitious individuals tend to think in large frames. They imagine complete transformations, major success, and meaningful impact. While this vision feels inspiring at a conscious level, the subconscious brain interprets it differently. It calculates effort, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. When the perceived cost is too high, the brain activates resistance. This resistance does not feel like fear in a dramatic sense. It feels like heaviness, distraction, boredom, or a sudden urge to do anything except the task that matters most. From the outside, this looks like laziness. Psychologically, it is energy preservation. The brain prioritizes efficiency, not fulfillment. If a goal appears complex, undefined, or emotionally risky, the mind delays action to avoid potential loss. Ambitious people are particularly vulnerable because they often attach their identity to their goals. Failure does not feel like a setback, it feels like a personal threat. As a result, the nervous system responds by slowing behavior down. Procrastination becomes a form of self-protection, allowing the person to maintain hope without facing the possibility of disappointment. Another layer of this dynamic lies in mental fatigue. Ambitious minds are rarely quiet. They overthink, plan excessively, and mentally rehearse outcomes long before action begins. This constant cognitive activity drains energy before any real work starts. By the time action is required, the brain already feels depleted. What appears as physical laziness is often mental exhaustion caused by over-anticipation. In psychiatric observation, this pattern is common among individuals with high standards and strong future orientation. They are not avoiding work because they don't care, they are avoiding it because their brain is overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they care about. The ambition remains alive, but the nervous system, sensing prolonged strain, pulls back. Understanding this reveals an important truth: laziness in ambitious people is often not a lack of motivation, but a misalignment between desire and the brain's instinct to conserve energy. From a psychiatric perspective, procrastination in ambitious individuals is rarely about poor discipline or lack of interest. More often, it is driven by internal pressure created by perfectionism, fear of failure, and cognitive overload. These individuals do not delay because they are indifferent, they delay because the task has become psychologically heavy. The mind turns something meaningful into something threatening. Perfectionism plays a central role. Ambitious people often hold an idealized image of how things should be done. The standard is not simply good enough, but flawless, impressive, and identity-defining. When the brain perceives that the current energy, mood, or circumstances cannot meet this internal standard, it hesitates. Action feels risky because it might expose imperfection. So the mind waits for a moment that feels right, not realizing that this moment rarely arrives. The delay protects self-esteem in the short term, even as it damages progress in the long term. Fear of failure intensifies this pattern. For ambitious individuals, failure is not just an outcome, it becomes evidence. Evidence that they are not as capable as they believed, evidence that their dreams may be unrealistic, evidence that effort might not guarantee reward. Psychologically, this activates avoidance circuits. The brain prefers the discomfort of delay over the emotional pain of confirmed failure. Procrastination allows ambition to remain untouched, preserved in imagination rather than tested in reality. Cognitive overload further complicates the issue. Ambitious minds tend to think broadly and deeply. They analyze every step, anticipate obstacles, and mentally simulate multiple futures at once. While this appears productive, it often paralyzes action. The brain becomes overwhelmed by choices, possibilities, and consequences. When mental bandwidth is exceeded, the nervous system defaults to inaction. This is not laziness, it is overload. In clinical settings, this form of procrastination is often accompanied by guilt, restlessness, and self-criticism. The person wants to act but feels internally blocked. The longer the delay continues, the heavier the emotional burden becomes, creating a feedback loop: pressure increases, avoidance increases, and confidence erodes. Understanding this reveals a crucial insight. Ambitious procrastinators are not resisting work, they are resisting the emotional weight attached to it. Until that weight is reduced, motivation alone will never be enough. From a psychiatric lens, ambition becomes psychologically dangerous when it exists without structure, emotional regulation, and realistic pacing. When desire is strong but systems are weak, the mind fills the gap with avoidance behaviors. These behaviors are often mislabeled as laziness, when in reality they are adaptive responses to internal chaos. The brain is not refusing to work, it is refusing to operate without a sense of control. Ambitious individuals often rely on motivation rather than structure. Motivation is emotional and unstable, while structure is neutral and regulating. Without clear routines, defined steps, and predictable effort, the brain perceives action as uncertain and exhausting. Uncertainty activates stress responses. Instead of moving forward, the nervous system searches for immediate relief, which appears as distraction, scrolling, sleeping, or disengagement. These behaviors soothe anxiety temporarily, reinforcing avoidance patterns over time. Emotional dysregulation intensifies this cycle. Ambition amplifies emotions: hope, pressure, fear, and self-judgment. When a person lacks the ability to regulate these emotions, the mind seeks escape. Avoidance becomes a coping mechanism. The task itself is no longer the problem, the emotional state attached to it is. This is why ambitious people can work intensely on low-stakes activities but freeze when facing tasks that matter deeply. The emotional cost feels too high. Another critical factor is identity-based ambition. When goals are tightly tied to self-worth, every action feels like a test of value. This creates psychological fragility. The brain responds by minimizing exposure. Inaction preserves identity by avoiding situations that could challenge it. From a psychiatric standpoint, this is a protective strategy, not a failure of character. Over time, the absence of structure and regulation trains the brain to associate ambition with stress rather than progress. The mind learns that big dreams lead to emotional discomfort, so it delays engagement. This delay is misinterpreted as laziness, while the true issue remains unaddressed. Clinically, improvement does not come from pushing harder but from stabilizing the internal environment. When ambition is paired with structure, emotional tolerance, and manageable steps, avoidance loses its purpose. Action becomes safer, not forced. And when the brain no longer needs to protect itself, the so-called laziness begins to disappear. In the end, the psychology of people who are labeled lazy but feel deeply ambitious reveals something uncomfortable and powerful. The problem is rarely a lack of desire, and almost never a lack of potential. It is a nervous system under pressure, a mind overloaded by expectation, and an ambition that has outgrown its emotional and structural support. When ambition is misunderstood, it turns inward and becomes paralysis. From a psychiatric perspective, this is not a character flaw to be shamed, but a signal to be decoded. The brain resists not because it is weak, but because it is trying to protect identity, energy, and emotional safety. Calling this laziness only deepens the conflict. Understanding it creates the possibility of change. The real transformation begins when ambition is no longer treated as a burst of motivation, but as something that requires regulation, containment, and patience. Progress does not come from forcing action through guilt, but from making action feel psychologically safe. Small steps matter not because they are easy, but because they teach the brain that movement does not equal threat. So the strongest message is this: if you feel ambitious but stuck, you are not broken. Your mind is responding logically to internal pressure. When you replace self-judgment with awareness, structure with chaos, and compassion with shame, action becomes possible again. Ambition does not need to be louder. It needs to be steadier. And when the mind feels safe enough to move, even the most lazy person can become quietly, consistently unstoppable.